Should be working well now, just for the sake of recording. Cool. Sorry about that, folks. So the number one thing when it comes to making sure that your makeup is going to be looking good is actually just using best practices when it comes to skincare. So number one, before you start your makeup journey, make sure that you are able to find formulations of cleansers and moisturizers that are going to suit your type of skin and whatever specific sensitivities or sometimes people have sensory issues regarding a lot of different skincare products as well, especially with sunscreens. I have a lot of issues with sunscreen, the way it feels on the skin. So a lot of times I recommend figuring out works best for your skin type. Now, a lot of these different formulations are going to be really confusing, especially if you don't know that much about skincare. So when it comes to a cleanser, you're going to want something that gently removes all of the makeup and dirt out of your skin. You also have different formulations that are going to be exfoliating. And there are a couple different ways that different skincare products exfoliate. One is through manual exfoliation. So you get like the little scrubby bits, and those will help like remove any dead skin on the surface. And that's very important. You don't want to overdo it though, because your skin is very sensitive, especially if you are taking hormone replacement therapy. A lot of your skin is going to be changing, whether you're on testosterone or estrogen. A lot of times, testosterone can make your skin a little bit more oily and it can often cause little flare ups of acne before you start adjusting to it. Estrogen kind of does a little bit of the opposite, but there can also be a little bit of a breakout period as well, depending on your body type, your skin type, and how your biology reacts to it. Um, with that being said, you don't want to over exfoliate regardless of which end of the spectrum you're in, because a lot of times that can cause redness. It can actually take the top layer of your skin off and leave it prone to further acne or infections. So less is more, even when it comes to skincare as well. So, number one, cleansing. You want to exfoliate a little bit. Chemical exfoliants are also something really nice and a lot more gentle. And a lot of times people get scared of the word chemical because it sounds kind of scary, but I promise you, chemical just means it has alpha hydroxy acid or beta hydroxy acids in it, which are gentle acids that work with your skin to remove the dead skin chemically and basically dissolve all the dead skin cells and wipe them away instead of manually doing it. And a lot of times that's going to be a lot more gentle, even though it sounds kind of counterintuitive. Um, Especially if you have drier skin, exfoliating is definitely going to be very important to do because it can leave a lot of flakiness or texture on the skin. And when you finally go into doing your foundation or like concealer, anything on the skin, it can be picked up and more noticeable. And counterintuitively, by adding makeup onto your skin, it like suddenly has aged you. And we don't want that to happen. So, in order to keep everything looking like your skin but better, exfoliate, cleanse your skin, and then you're going to want to, you don't technically have to use a toner, but especially if you have any areas where you feel like you need to shave, I do find that using a toner that doesn't have alcohol in it, alcohol dries out the skin. Something like witch hazel, for example, is actually very soothing to the skin, can actually help to, as an astringent, kind of pull the redness away from the skin and kind of help it to look a lot more soothed and a lot smoother and happier. So I will say that if you do tend to find any spots where you do tend to have to shave every once in a while, or if you have like irritation from like electrolysis or laser, things like that, a lot of times toners will be very helpful. Again, avoid alcohol-based ones though, unless you have really oily skin, because the more like alcohol you tend to have in a toner, the more it's going to dry out your skin. Um, so that's definitely something that you want to keep aware of. Finally, the most important thing is going to be moisturizing, especially before you do foundation. Like my skin right now, it's so shiny. It's not actually oily, even though I do have oilier skin. This is just all skincare preparation that I put on before I'm even going to be doing my foundation. When you're looking at moisturizers, depending on your skin type, you're going to need a different preparation. So if you're on the oilier end of the spectrum, you're going to want to look for products that have like a thicker kind of formulation to it. A lot of times those products tend to have thicker agents to it that are going to moisturize on a deeper level and actually hold that moisturizer in on the skin. Whereas if you have an oilier skin type, your skin is already naturally secreting a lot of oil, sebum that protects your skin. But you can actually find moisturizers that help to balance that to where it's not producing as much oil. They're actually oil absorbing. Um, a lot of times too, um, you're going to look for specific ingredients like hyaluronic acid, regardless of your skin type. Now, that's an ingredient that basically it's kind of sci-fi. It actually literally pulls moisture from your literal environment directly into it's literally forcing your skin to drink water throughout the day practically. It's really cool actually. Hyaluronic acid is naturally found within the body, so a lot of times people tend not to have a reaction to it as well, so it tends to be very allergy safe and friendly. And a lot of hyaluronic acid formulations tend to be very sensory friendly as well because they tend to dry down on the skin. Again, take that with a grain of salt though, because some really super thicker hydrating formulations are going to have hyaluronic acid in it, but they're still going to have other, like plant-based oils, for example, that are going to sit on top of the skin and lock all that moisture in. So, depends, but typically look for something that has like hyaluronic acid in it. Vitamin C is definitely an important ingredient when it comes to brightening the skin. This is an ingredient I would use definitely in the morning. A lot of people, especially as you get older in your mid 20s and up, tend to use retinol-based products. So you have like retinol, retinoid, tretinoin, that's more prescription-based, vitamin A, which is a different version basically of retinol. Retinol is basically vitamin A. Um, when you're putting that on your skin, typically you're going to want to use that only in moisturizers or serums at night. Because if you use that in the morning, it can actually increase your sensitivity to sun damage. And we don't want that. We want it to be anti aging and not contributing to active aging. Um, Vitamin E and niacinamide, um, ceramides in general, those are usually going to be very like they're going to pull moisture into the skin. Not quite the same way that hyaluronic acid does, but it's going to basically give you instant hydration into the skin. And then a lot of times they're formulated with a little bit to stay on the top to keep it locked in. Another important thing that you're going to need, regardless of whether you're wearing foundation or not, but you definitely want to do this before you apply your foundation, is sunscreen. You're going to want something that's SPF 30 or higher. Sometimes you can get fortunate in a lot of foundations. Like this is just a cheap one from e.l.f. It's broad spectrum SPF 30. So sometimes you can get lucky and have different products that have all of those in one. This one even actually has the collagen, peptides, and niacinamide. Those are all going to be very moisturizing on the skin, for example. This is a tinted moisturizer, which is why, but that's just an example. The only downside though is a lot of times the foundation products that have SPF in them, as you know, a lot of times you have to reapply SPF throughout the day, but it depends. If you're outside on a regular basis, you're going to want to reapply it. A lot of times there are brands like Supergoop, for example. Depends on where you live in, where you can get that. But they have like a mineral SPF that you can dust on over the top of your makeup as like a reapplication without having to redo your whole face again. Um, so there's also sprays too that you can spray that are face safe to be sprayed over. Those ones are going to be a little bit more tolerable too, especially it's almost like a setting spray for ease of application as well. Again, though, texture issues, the powder one is going to kind of seamlessly sit on the skin in a way that doesn't leave like a texture or like a perceptive film behind in the same way that like a sunscreen spray might. So just keep that in mind. Um, Another thing that you can use too, this isn't necessary all the time, but I do highly recommend it, is primer. Now, primer is a good way of creating a barrier between all of that hard work you just did with your skincare. So you cleansed, maybe you toned, and then you definitely moisturized and SPF'd. You don't want that necessarily mixing in with all of your makeup. Sometimes they might not have the same formulation. So having a primer is definitely going to be a good way to safely barrier in between those two things so that your makeup looks the best that it can throughout the rest of the day. Um, Sorry if the network is giving you guys issues. I should have a pretty good stream going, but if you have issues, just mention it in the comments. Again, with primers, they do have different formulations depending on your skin type. For drier skin, a lot of them are going to be water-based, extremely hydrating, usually going to have hyaluronic acid in them. A lot of primers will also have a silicone base to them. And silicone based tends to be very blurring, but also hydrating on the skin. And the reason they typically go for silicone is because it is usually going to be inert and not interact with the skin. So people tend not to have reactions to it, or less likely to have like allergic reactions or discomfort as a result of applying it. And it has a very silky feel, and it makes whatever you put on top of it seem very silky and smooth as well. Now, I will say though, you need to bear in mind matching your primer to the kind of foundation or complexion products you're going to be using. So if you're using a water-based primer, you're going to want to have a foundation that is a similar basis. If you're using a silicone-based primer, you're going to want a foundation that has a silicone base to it. If you're using oil-based, you're going to want something that has more of an oil base to it. And the reason for that is primarily because you've tried to mix oil and water before and they didn't mix, right? It's the same concept. And a lot of times when it comes to both skincare and cosmetics, if you try and mix oil and water like that, you're going to end up with something called pilling. So you'll end up with tiny little deposits of product that have kind of like rolled together. And that's because they're not compatible with one another. They might be both independently great products, but they work great with the products that have similar aspects to them. Whereas if you try and mix them against one another, you're going to end up with weird little texture things, sometimes patchiness, because they are not playing nice together. So just something to keep in mind. A lot of times it's easy to play around with those kind of things inside of a cosmetics store, but if not, you can easily just peek at the ingredients list on a primer that you're looking at and the foundation that you may already have, for example, and see if they have some of the same ingredients, because in all likelihood, they're probably going to play nice. That being said, there's also primers for oilier skin, and those actually tend to have oil absorbing properties to them. You can actually target specific areas with different primers even. So for me personally, since I have oilier skin, I really like, this is travel size, but this Milk Makeup one, because it is silicone based, which works with the cosmetics that I have, but I can target specific areas like my nose and cheek area that get especially oily, and my forehead, and just kind of smooth it across the skin and kind of press it into the skin. You don't want to use too much. Less is always more in makeup, and it comes down to your technique when it comes to applying a lot of these things. So a lot of times you can kind of just swipe them on really fast, but if you want something specific to do something specific, a lot of times it comes down to, okay, well, I know this product is oil absorbing, so I'm just going to press it into the skin right here, make sure it's blurred all of the texture, my enlarged pores or any acne scarring, swipe it in and then press it in. And that way, if my skincare, like for example, I have some vitamin C on underneath this, it doesn't quite play nice with my makeup. So using that primer and pressing it into the skin is going to help this look a lot nicer when I actually go ahead and do my makeup. Once you've kind of done your skincare routine and you've added primer as like a decent base, um, my personal order of doing things would be to go straight into doing corrector wherever you might need it. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. So when it comes to color corrector, you're going to have a couple different colors going here. So for the under eye area, typically you're going to want to use like the pink or peach kind of colors. When it comes to color correcting redness, rosacea, acne, you're going to want to head towards either the yellow or the green. If your issue is you feel like your skin looks really dull or you're having a bit of sallowness or like an extra yellow tinge to the skin and you're not really looking for that, you can color correct that with the purple. However, the ones that we're probably going to focus on right now are just these two for now. These are both color correcting shades. For me, because I'm fair, I'm going to use this one. But if you had a darker complexion, you're probably going to want to use this one. So a little bit goes a long way, especially if it's cream based. And if it's cream based, I tend to actually like to use my fingertips because the heat from your body will actually naturally kind of help it to melt into your skin instead of it just sitting on top of the skin. And notice the technique I'm using. I'm just pressing it into the skin instead of swiping it on the skin. Swiping will give you less coverage and give it a streakier appearance, whereas pressing it into the skin is going to give it a little bit more coverage. So you can already see, even though this is technically peach and pink and not actually my skin tone at all, ironically, just because it's covered up any of the darkness in this area, it weirdly looks almost like my skin tone. And that's because of color theory. And we'll get into that a little bit more. Now, just for the sake of being thorough, sometimes I'll use a brush or a sponge just to blend out the edges. And I tend not to use my finger to do that just because I don't want it to be streaky. Cool. Color corrector, no color corrector. Now, if you have any bits of like hair poking through, especially in your like kind of upper lip or chin jawline area, especially right in here, a lot of times it's easy to miss this spot right here because it's not obviously part of your face, but it's part of your neck and your face together. A lot of times it's a good idea to kind of gently color correct these areas too. Again, less is more, work in thin little layers of it because you want it to look like skin and you don't want it to look heavy or cakey. So it's kind of taken away, ironically, a little bit of the redness up here too from my couple blemishes I have, but it's also color corrected a little bit of like purpley blue tones that are on my upper lip just from little bits of hair kind of wanting to pop through. Even though I'm smooth shaven and everything, sometimes a little bit of residual shadow will kind of poke through, not literally poke through, but kind of like peek through whatever colors on your skin are naturally there. So you definitely want to kind of even that out. Sometimes I'll swipe a little bit, especially in areas that have a little bit of extra moisturizer to it, just to push the product a little bit further, but I still continue to go back and tap. Now, if I wanted to, I could cover up a little bit of the redness as well. Now it's gonna look a little bit crazy at first. This, because I don't want it to be as full coverage, I can kind of swirl it in a little bit and then press it in again. It's gonna look a little bit green until I actually go ahead and go ahead and apply foundation. If you're having issues seeing the stream, you can maybe try and see if you're able to flip through the audience cameras and go straight to see if the one speaking, which should be me, pops up. And you should be able to click on it and it should come up for you, where it's a little bit easier to see. Or yes, reconnecting may help you as well. We are also recording the stream as well. So if you have any issues with any specific sections, we'll keep in touch with the media team regarding that and see if when that video gets published or posted on the Trans Academy VODs page on YouTube or on the Twitch, um, you should be able to still see it there. And we are I think we're actually live streaming this on our Twitch as well. So if you're having issues with Discord specifically, you should also be able to see it on our Twitch if it's easier for you. That being said, now that I've kind of color corrected, actually, let me do this side just to match. After color correcting, then we can start getting into foundation. Now, everyone has different orders, and they're not necessarily right or wrong because there are no rules in makeup. That being said, my professional and personal opinion is to do eyes first simply because if you mess up, it's very easy to clean up because it's just bare skin and you don't have to worry about it leaving a mark on all of that hard work that you just did regarding your skincare, your foundation, concealer, your bronzer, everything else. So I tend to do eyes first because it's easy to clean up, and then I'll do color corrector first, then foundation, and then concealer wherever I might need it. And the reason I do it that way is because I want to use less product. I want the skin to look less heavy and less cakey. And I find that by color correcting, you're using very little product to do that. And then doing a nice even layer of foundation on top of that. Sometimes you don't even need to use concealer afterwards. Especially if you have pretty clear skin or the color correcting actually did its job well. Um, now that being said, sometimes I'll see people do concealer first, like especially if you have a blemish or something you want to cover up, and then you go and you do foundation over it. Sometimes you'll struggle with that area because going over that with your foundation, with especially with a brush, but sometimes with a sponge, it'll disturb where you've put the concealer because it's already dried. Concealers are thicker in concentration than foundation. Something like this is going to be very thick, very full coverage and opaque, whereas a foundation is going to be very liquidy, nowhere near as much coverage as that. So once you're done doing the color correcting, I would do foundation and then concealer, only wherever you need it a little bit more. But we will get to that in a minute as well. So when it comes to foundations, there's a bunch of different formulations. And by that, I mean, sometimes it's a powder. This is like a powder I like to use. It's me, it's this one actually. So powder formulation. Those tend to be a little bit less coverage. You can barely see me swatching that. But depending on your technique, you can build it up. Foundations can also come in tinted moisturizers. Tinted moisturizers are essentially a foundation product that is going to come across a little bit more sheer, kind of just color correct a little bit naturally by the way that the product is designed. And it's going to fill in a little bit of your blemishes, but not quite the same way that a full coverage foundation would tend to. These are going to be extremely great for the drier skin types, especially. Or for folks who have like freckles and natural little imperfections that they want to show through. Um, so, for example, if I had a ton of freckles, I would probably go for a tinted moisturizer instead of like a full coverage foundation because those are cute and you want them to show through. Some natural imperfections, your moles, things like that can be really cute and they make you a little bit more human and a little less like full coverage android, you know what I mean? So having little imperfections here and there and using less product, less is more. Um, Now that being said, if you want a full beat, full coverage, like full 2016 mode, that's perfectly okay too. I do that half the time, depending on how good my skin is that day. But a lot of times, again, using the approach of less is more is going to help even full coverage products like the creams. A lot of cream-based cosmetics, like these, for example, even just touching that, you can already see how thick that is, how full coverage that's going to come across. So by strategically placing product and blending them in with specific tools, even if it's very full coverage, you can still get a medium or light coverage. So tinted moisturizer or tinted face balm as well. You'll see that on a lot of Korean beauty products. Usually it'll be in a little compact kind of like this, and you'll open it and you'll have like a little kind of beauty balm, but it's essentially the same thing as a tinted moisturizer in a compact version. And it tends to have a lot of specifically Korean skincare benefits in it as well. Stick foundation, a lot, I hate to say it, but a lot of times stick foundation is literally the same thing as like these cream foundations, but formulated in a way that it holds its own shape. Um, you'll see those from brands like Anastasia or Hourglass. I actually really like the Hourglass one. Those tend to be better suited for oilier complexions. So tinted moisturizers, those were better. Not to say that oily skin can't wear them as well. Obviously, I do as well, but drier skin types are going to be more suited towards things like tinted moisturizers or just liquid foundation in general. Whereas something like the powder foundation tends to be geared more towards people who have an oilier complexion simply because powder is dry, and unless you've really moisturized adequately, I wouldn't recommend applying a powder to a dry skin type because it may just dry you out that much more. Um, you also have like whipped foundations and things like that. Those tend to be a little bit more gimmicky, in my opinion, but if you're as old as I am and you lived through the early thousands, everyone and their grandma was wearing the Maybelline whipped foundation for some reason, and it was always like 3 shades too dark for everybody. It was a very popular formulation, and it did have a good coverage, but I will say that for that era, it was not necessarily the greatest shade range. And fortunately, in 2024, we definitely have a lot better shade ranges. And that also might be why there's a huge stigma against color matching yourself, because a lot of times you have to go to like a drugstore and they don't have any testers. They're not going to let you try anything on. So you just have to grab a couple different shades and hope for the best, which is probably why a lot of us ended up being orange in the early thousands, unfortunately. But This class should help to prevent that from happening, regardless of whether you get a professional to color match you or if you feel more comfortable doing it yourself. So that's all the different types of formulations for the most part. This is also a friendly reminder that, especially in our community, shopping for cosmetics can definitely be very distressing and anxiety inducing and honestly feel unsafe for a lot of folks. So I would suggest relying on the support of your community, your allies, your friends, um, and your loved ones, like people close to you if you need to, when it comes to shopping for cosmetics. Um, a lot of times that can help you to feel safer if you do feel like you want to go out and get professionally color matched. I'll speak more on that in a minute. Um, but having, relatives, friends, people who share similar interests to you and who understand the struggle, that can definitely help when it comes to, having the courage to go out in person and get color matched professionally. Especially if they're just you're it's okay to lie, especially for your own safety. If you're talking about, hey, like maybe you're in the closet and you want to go get color matched and you're there with a friend who might not be as discriminated against, using that kind of their privilege as kind of like a shield to help you is definitely something that's very helpful when it comes to preserving your safety, and especially if you're still in the closet but you still want someone to help you out, or you're shopping with your friend when it comes to, going and getting color matched. Ultimately, at the end of the day, your safety and your sanity are going to be the most important things. And so, everything that I want to teach you about today, keeping that in mind. So, I'll show you a couple different ways to color match, even if you can't go physically in person as well. So, a lot of issues that you might run into. So, companies like Sephora, for example, um, they're going to be ones who have streamlined the color matching process and the foundation finding process a lot through technology with the Color IQ, where they digitally scan usually your cheek and your forehead, and then usually this area right here as well. And they actually color match you. They check your undertone and your shade, which is something we'll also discuss in a minute. And it will actually digitally match you to all of the products, whether it's foundation, powder, concealer, to everything that they have online and in store. Downside of that is it's not necessarily always foolproof. If the person scanning you scans you and the light isn't quite uniform, it might throw things off a little bit, like they're scanning you like over here where it's a little bit more natural light versus whatever. Um, or um, they scan your skin and they're scanning an area, especially if you have more melanin in your skin. Your skin is going to be brighter here and darker on the outer perimeter. If someone scans you too far out in an area where you tend to be a little bit darker, it's going to skew a little darker. Or if they scan somewhere as a little brighter, it's going to skew maybe slightly brighter, which is why they have the 3 different scans to kind of average it out at least. But those are just small issues that you can come across, and I just want to show you the pros and cons of different ways. Um, Another cool thing about Sephora, though, is that they do actually, and this goes for Ulta as well, they do tend to have really friendly, understanding, accommodating staff. And as I've worked for both companies, I can tell you that both companies have DEI training specifically for their employees and staff to help out the queer community, especially. We'll even have, like, at Sephora, for example, I still work there. We have literal like brand setups that showcase like queer owned brands and things like that as well. So they're definitely going to be more welcoming and accommodating, especially for folks who come in, regardless of how you look, to get color matched. That being said, a lot of people live in different countries or different states where maybe that still feels very uncomfortable, or they still have a lot of social anxiety. Our community runs or skews definitely more in the neurodivergent category, and I myself am neurodivergent. So a lot of times those things can be very difficult for you to do. So there are other options when it comes to getting color matched. Um, Another drawback is if you're trying to color match yourself or go someplace else that sells specifically foundation products. A lot of times places don't have testers, especially like in America, drugstore products. Whereas like Ulta and Sephora tend to have testers for their products, so you can actually swipe them and see what shade works for you. Other companies, chemists, drugstores, they're not going to have testers for you. You're just going to have to look at it and do your best, which is not a great concept. Um, so that being said, a couple of different more like privilege friendly solutions for foundation shade finding that I would recommend is take what you learned from this class with me teaching you how to color match yourself. And from there, you can match yourself to a specific brand or shade via going online. A lot of places will actually have free samples in store and online, but if you are afraid of going in person, use it online. A lot of times they'll have literal kind of like gifts with purchase type of things where you have a whole like card of different little samples of a specific complexion product, and you're able to test them and see which one works best for your skin. Another thing too is a lot of places have gotten a lot better about cosmetics returns. So when it comes to going to a drugstore, for example, a lot of times you can take a little bit of the guesswork out when it comes to finding your shade by just buying three or four shades that look very similar to your skin tone, taking them home, swatching them, going into different lighting, seeing how it looks, letting it sit on your skin, especially if you have oilier skin, because a lot of times products tend to oxidize or AKA grow darker slightly when applied to the skin, especially if you have oilier skin. So letting it sit on top of the skin, seeing if it gets any darker, making sure it doesn't. If it does, accommodating or changing what shade you picked to accommodate for the fact that you know it'll be darker. Um, so those are things that you can do. And then you just return the shades that didn't work out for you. So that's definitely an option. It's going to be a little bit more cost effective to do it that way. Again, it depends on what store you're going to, though. Not every store is going to have a good policy like that. Another thing, too, is a really cool thing you can do is once you actually find a shade that works for you, and again, this class will help us to determine what shade works for you. Once you find a shade that does work for you in a specific brand, there are online resources that are similar to Sephora, where they're actually able to color match you and you're matched to all the different products. There are websites like Findation, so Findation. It's a website and it's a free online resource that tells you your shade based off of the shades that you tell it that you know you are. And it shows you your shade in a different brand based off of you knowing your shade. So basically, that's the same concept as it color matching you to everything else in the store, but it's free. Like if you know what your shade is in MAC, for example, and you go to Foundation and you input your shade, it'll tell you, hey, you'd be this shade in the Urban Decay or the Anastasia foundation. You know what I mean? Um, Similar in concept to that, there's another website that is also free for you to use called Temptalia, Temptalia. Literally the same concept. Put your shade or shades in, and it will tell you what your shade would be approximately in a different brand. So if I wanted to see, okay, well, I really like this one, but I wanted to see what shade I would be in this brand, I could put that in there and it would tell me, and I could just order it online. I wouldn't even have to go in the store. So those are other resources that you can use that might help you a little bit more as well. Now, when it comes to color matching, one of the biggest and most important things that you're going to need to understand is undertone. So when you're looking at a color wheel, um, you'll see colors that are more on the cool end of the spectrum and more on the warm end of the spectrum. And then in between those, on each side, you'll have neutral, more neutral colors. So they're neither too cool nor too warm. And by cool and warm, I mean cool tends to have more blue in it, and warm tends to have more red in it. Neutral tends to be more yellowy. So I don't know if you remember like elementary school, like color theory and things like that they would teach us, but you have primary colors, which are going to be red, blue, and yellow, right? And you can typically mix those colors into different colors from those being your primary colors. So again, cool colors tend to be more on the blue end of the spectrum. Warm colors tend to be more on the red end of the spectrum, and in between that is going to be like a yellow or orange color scheme. Now, when it comes to color matching yourself, because like a neutral skin tone, whether it's a darker brown or a more fair color, those are going to be those, each one of those has an undertone, but because they tend to be like in that middle category, it's a little harder to determine them. So an easy way to determine what your undertone is, I'm sure a lot of people have done this, you normally look at your veins. So typically if you have blue veins, remember what side of the color wheel was cool? It was the bluer end of the spectrum. So blue veins coming through the skin, you're going to be more of a cool tone. And those foundation shades are going to tend to come across more pink or reddish or blue hues, depending on if you're light, medium, or dark. Warm, on the other hand, if you go and you look at your veins, those veins are going to come across more green. So you're going to tend to see in warmer tones more yellow or golden hues. Even though they're more on the warm end of the spectrum, the added red aspect to it tends to create more of an orangey or a kind of peachy tone. Neutral, if you go and you look at your veins, you're going to have a very hard time determining whether it looks more blue or it looks more green. It's kind of in between. Most people tend to be more neutral. That's not always the case, of course, but neutral tends to be a little bit more popular or more common, I would say. So neutral is going to be more of a mixture of blue and green tone in your veins, and the colors that tend to come through are going to be more balanced, or even more of um, like yellowish tint to it almost. Um, a color tone or an undertone that is not often mentioned that I want to also mention is olive, um, because as a light-skinned Hispanic, a lot of times color matchers are going to match you to like a cool undertone because you're so fair, and they're just going to assume you're going to be more pink, um, especially if you sunburn really easily and stuff like that. But a lot of folks who are either Hispanic or Indian, for example, tend to have like an olivish tone, which is a variation of neutral, but it has a little bit of a green coming through. So kind of like how the green color corrector on my skin right here kind of intensifies how all of this area is that much more. Again, I'm not quite sure why skincare companies haven't really latched onto the olive category too much. Um, Personally, I have a long history, especially when I was working for Urban Decay, in color matching Indian women specifically, and they tend to have a lot of issues when it comes to getting color matched, specifically because olive tones tend not to exist. So a lot of times products that are too cool or too warm can make them look very ashy, and that's definitely not what you want. So you have to really understand your undertone specifically. So that's just something I wanted to throw out there because that's an issue I personally experienced as a professional that can cause a lot of issues for other people. when it comes to finding your own skincare or your own skin tone, excuse me. Um, so now that you know what the undertones are, another thing that is important is knowing what depth and intensity are. So when you see different foundations in store, a lot of times they'll have like names on them. So like this one is Fair 100W. So the W indicates that it's warm toned, and 100 is going to indicate the depth or intensity. So usually you're going to see W for warm, N for neutral, C for cool, and then it'll list a number, and that number is usually going to go from smallest to highest, not always, but usually just for sake of keeping things easy, lightest to darkest, um, smallest number to highest number. And that number tends to be what you see on the side here. So your undertone and then your shade, your the depth and intensity. So undertone is the tone or the colors that go into, or the proportion of colors that go into it, whereas depth is going to be how literal light and dark that shade is. Um, how saturated or how pure the color is going to be. So this is helpful specifically because all of us, depending on what season it is, are going to get lighter or darker. So it kind of sucks when you color match yourself and you have the perfect shade and then you're like, oh man, I tan, now I gotta get darker. And you don't know how to interpret what any of these numbers or letters mean. This is gonna make it easier because as long as you know that your undertone is always warm or always cool or always neutral, all you have to do is jump up to the next highest or the next lowest, depending on what your situation is. But let's say you are getting darker and you're shopping for your foundation, but you already know you're this shade. Just go up to the next highest number that has that undertone indicator next to it. So if I am 100W in this brand, they'll have a couple of different numbers like 120, 130, 140, and those are all different undertones. And then, 150 comes up and all of a sudden it's the same undertone again. I'm like, okay, that's the one I need to pick because that's the next darkest for my undertone. So hopefully that helps you, especially when it comes to shopping and you need a little bit of a darker shade. Now, when it comes to actually color matching on your skin, the easiest place, in my opinion, is to swatch right in this area because you get the full context of the shades of your face, your neck, and your chest, which tends to be the same shade as the rest of your body. Now, typically, take a tiny bit of product and swipe it over the skin. A couple different ones just to illustrate the point. These are just a couple of different shades here. This is what they look like. Now, I right now am going to be at a more neutral undertone. So it's very easy to see the ones that have a warm undertone. These two are too warm for me, even though they came from a foundation palette that has a whole bunch of different shades to it. These ones come out very obviously too orangey on me. And that's because they're too warm. They have too much red in them and not enough yellow in them. Whereas these two are my closer contenders. So when you have two close contenders here, sometimes it helps to blend them just a tiny bit to see how well it disappears into the skin. because you want it to match almost exactly. If it's too bright, too yellow, too pink, that's not the correct undertone for you. So for me, I would say this one pretty much disappeared completely into my skin. And another way that you can test that out, actually, is to, once you've determined or narrowed it down, take that color and pop it on your forehead and blend it in. And it should pretty much be invisible. Now, some folks have a darker forehead than the rest of their body or their face as well, which is why I also recommend once you find a shade by swatching your cheek, you test it on your forehead, because sometimes that shade that matches your forehead matches your whole face better, and then you can technically use a little bit of concealer, maybe a lighter shade of foundation just to brighten the middle of your face. The more melanin you have in your skin, the more apparent the difference in skin tones tends to be. The outer perimeter of the face is going to be darker, whereas the front, the cheeks, the nose, the forehead, the chin, this whole area, especially the darker you are, tends to be more noticeably brighter. So a way that you can actually make that work for you is picking whichever shade you prefer, whether it's the darker shade or the lighter shade, and then either, if you picked the lighter shade, add a darker shade to the outer perimeter, or if you picked the darker shade, just add lighter in the middle as well. I'm going to rub these off. I'm hoping everything is coming across pretty well so far. If you have any questions, please type them. I am periodically checking the chat just to see if you guys are asking questions, okay? Now that I have picked those, you also typically want to look in natural light as well, because the lighting will throw off whatever kind of undertones are under there sometimes. If you have a more blue light hitting you, that's going to interact with the more blue colors that are going to come through. If you have a warm light on you, it's going to distort the colors that are being detected that are more warm or blue. It's going to distort that a little bit, whereas natural light tends to be pretty even in tone, and it'll really show you clearly which one worked best for you. So I do recommend finding a bright light, or going outside, going to a window, different things like that, or even just taking a walk around the mall if you went to shop for cosmetics in the mall and come back and see what it looks like. Some common problems that I notice, especially when it comes to people matching themselves, is they test the foundation on their hands, their arms, their body, and they're like, okay, well, that one matches me, so it must match my face. If I were to color match my arm, let's see. Let me do this real fast for you. This shade right here, sorry, I'm hiding the other dark one, is going to be way too dark or peachy, warm on my face. In actual photos and in real life, that's going to look really orange. And it's simply because my arm and my hand, for example, are tanner than my face. So me swatching here on my body, I'm not going to get, I'm going to end up being too orange. At least for me personally, that's just a specific example. Um, for my friends out there who have more melanin, a lot of times you're going to want to make sure that you know what your undertone is too, because a lot of times if you have a darker complexion, you're going to want more blue pigmentation in it if you have a cooler base to your skin tone. If you have a warmer base, sometimes they can look too yellow, and it's because you need more red. So whereas most folks who tend to be more medium or lighter skin toned can easily go, okay, cool and warm and neutral. A lot of times, the darker your complexion becomes, you might actually find that the cooler shade will need a little extra blue in it, or the warm shade might need a little extra red in it, and neutral shades are either going to be like a dead on match a lot of the time, or they don't match at all, and you have to figure out whether you're more cool toned or warm toned. Um, and I will say that a huge mistake I see a lot of people who have darker skin tones do that make them look ashy is they're actually warm toned, but they picked the cool toned one, or vice versa. They don't actually match. They end up creating like a gray kind of cast tone to it. Or another problem is you'll be cool toned, but you'll end up going for the warm tone because I hate to say it, but cosmetics companies don't really always do the greatest job of making skin tones for people of color. And they might have only cool tones or they might have only warm tones. Um, a lot of times it can make people look either ashy or orange. So really making sure that you focus on what your undertone is will definitely help you, especially when it comes to navigating the scarcity, unfortunately, of darker skin tones and foundation shades that are in most cosmetics locations. Thoughts of advice regarding acne clearing concealers. There are some acne clearing products that are out there. However, personally, I recommend using skincare specifically to fight acne underneath. Um, Neutrogena back in the day and Clinique usually are the go-to brands for people who tend to have acne and they want acne fighting ingredients in their foundation products. However, I find that as long as you have a really good routine for your skincare first and foremost, whatever cosmetics you put on top, as long as you make sure that they're not scented and they don't have any ingredients that tend to cause you to break out, like um, heavy like beeswax, for example, or certain types of oils. A lot of people tend to avoid oil. Like it's a bad word, but honestly, a lot of different products that have oils in them are actually very nourishing for the skin, even if you do have acne. It's a little bit outdated nowadays, I think, for people to avoid oil if they have like acne prone or oily skin, just because different oils may actually contribute to you being less oily, ironically enough, like castor oil. Um, but specifically when it comes to doing makeup when you have acne, the biggest thing I think is making sure that you have a good regimen in place. Usually ingredients like benzoyl peroxide or salicylic acid. Those are big ingredients for fighting acne specifically. Witch hazel, tea tree oil, you might see those as well. Those are the more botanical end of the spectrum. Salicylic acid technically comes from willow bark, so it's actually the main ingredient in over-the-counter pain medication as well. But willow bark, it's actually a pain reliever. Um, but when used in skincare, it actually helps to fight acne as well. But I will say use specific targeting creams as well. Definitely helps. Um, there's a specific spot treatment from Fenty Beauty that I really like that has salicylic acid in it. And you use that before you put your makeup on because it actually creates like a clear band-aid over little blemishes that you might have that prevent it from interacting with your makeup, which helps it to, like whatever makeup you have on your skin, it prevents it from irritating your acne, which I do really like as well. That's came out this past year, I believe. It's like a little skinny tube and it has salicylic acid in it, and it's kind of like a liquid band-aid, but also acne treatment at the same time for specific blemishes. Again, though, skincare, a good primer. There are acne fighting primers as well. Again, I typically would rather invest in skincare than on cosmetics. A lot of brands like this one, for example, like the e.l.f. one, it's super cheap. Um, doesn't really have anything in it that irritates my acne. I used to have really bad cystic acne until I got my hormones a lot more regulated. Again, the biggest thing that helped for me personally was getting everything under control through skincare first, and then making sure whatever products you put on your skin, give them a little trial period, make sure they aren't going to irritate or break you out. If they do, don't use that product. especially if you already have a routine in place. I would switch one thing out at a time to see instead of just getting a whole new routine and having it all at once, because then it's a little harder to figure out what specific product is breaking you out. So, switching things out one at a time. If I found a concealer that works for me and I'm just trying a whole bunch of different foundations, try that foundation out at first, figure out what the pros and cons are. Again, the biggest thing in my experience that tends to irritate people's skin if they do have acne are alcohol-based products. They tend to dry out the skin and make the redness and flakiness a lot more prominent. And if you have active acne as well, making sure that you're focusing on the skincare aspects of it and getting rid of any products that might have fragrance or any other kind of allergens in it that a lot of people tend to actually react to. So, look for things that say fragrance free. Um, a lot of people would tell you to look for things that say oil free for acne prone skin, but it's too broad of a ban in my opinion for oily or acne prone skin. So I would use your best judgment, try things out, see if they work for your skin. If not, I would discontinue that. Getting back to color matching, um, you definitely, like I said, want to keep your natural beauty in mind, especially when it comes to like darker folks having I mean, it's true of fairer folks too. You tend to have a darker shade here, and then the center of your face tends to be brighter. And that's kind of why you have things like contouring in place, because a lot of times people put on one shade and it's very full coverage, and all of a sudden they have zero dimension to their face all over again. So you want to make sure that you still have dimension in your face. One way to really make that easy is to pick your kind of darker shade that you are and use that as your foundation, and then maybe slightly brighter have concealer in just the areas that brighten your face and blend that out in a way that is still very flattering, that emphasizes the two tones without getting muddy, aka blending them too much. There's a couple different things that you can do to troubleshoot your foundation as well. There's a lot of issues that a lot of people have as well. So let's say your foundation color matches your face, but not your neck. That's actually a common problem because a lot of people, especially people with longer hair, that is actually the fact that I have longer hair tends to interact with the light and shade this area to where it's not getting direct sunlight in the same way that my face and chest are. One way to correct that is to go with the shade that matches your face and not your neck, and simply take some bronzer very lightly on a bigger, fluffier brush and gently apply that over the neck area. And that way your face and body are in tune with one another. If you pick the darker shade or the lighter shade on the neck that matches your lighter neck, and you put that on the face, it can kind of wash you out, make you look kind of um, ghostly, patchy, um, kind of disrupts the harmony of it. And it's a little bit more difficult to fix because then you have to really go into contouring, making sure the bronzing is done in a way that is still flattering and doesn't come off orange. So, in my opinion, it's easier just to lightly bronze from the jawline down a little bit. And that way it kind of creates that unity and harmony in a much simpler way. And it's a lot more beginner friendly, especially if that is an issue that you struggle with. Um, Another issue is having like an orange peel kind of texture coming through. And that's typically going to be like kind of texturized looking. Um, a lot of things that can be caused because you didn't moisturize enough, and so texture is a little bit more apparent now that you've put product on. Um, One of the things that I would recommend is investing in a primer again that would smooth out the texture. A lot of ones that are silicone based, like dimethicone or simethicone, those are going to blur out the pores but also be hydrating, but not too hydrating that they disrupt oilier skin types. Um, if that doesn't help, another issue that could be causing texture like that could be the actual product itself is just not compatible with your skin type, or the technique that you're using to apply it is not conducive to the way that it's meant to be applied. So if I'm applying a sponge or using a sponge to apply like a thick cream, it might not get into all the nooks and crannies and give you that kind of texturized appearance. But if I use a dense brush instead, it's going to get into all the little nooks and crannies in the texture, for example. Speaking of that, there are a couple different tools that are going to be super beneficial when it comes to using a foundation. So the classic is this kind of little paintbrush looking guy that you can kind of just paint all of the foundation on really fast. This is going to give you the most amount of coverage out of any of the techniques, in my opinion. Um, Personally, though, I don't really use this on myself. I only really use it when I'm doing photo shoots to just quickly apply product, and then I just grab a sponge and blend it in after I've applied it. Um, I would just say that that's the main draw of it is having full coverage and ease of just swiping it onto the skin really fast. Um, Obviously, your hands are a tool that you can use. Like I said, hands are my favorite tool when it comes to applying thicker cream products in targeted areas, like the color corrector under my eyes. Um, that's also going to give you pretty full coverage. I wouldn't recommend doing it for your whole face, though. And another drawback is you have to definitely make sure that your hands are thoroughly clean as well. Your hands are going to be one of the dirtiest parts of your body. And you don't want to be, especially if you are acne prone, you don't want to be doing that in a way that contributes to growing bacteria. That's also true of sponges and brushes as well. You want to ensure that they're clean on a regular basis, especially if you are more acne prone or irritation prone. I will say that my personal favorite is going to be either the dense round brush or the sponge. Um, the dense round brush is going to be great for liquids and creams and even powder applications. Um, I wouldn't recommend it for drier skin types though. Um, if you have a drier skin type, especially when it comes to applying with a sponge, a lot of times you're just going to be swirling it onto your skin real fast to get a nice even blend. But if you have dry flakes and you're doing this, all of a sudden those flakes that you might not have seen are suddenly apparent because it's lifted them up. So I wouldn't recommend a brush for drier skin types unless you're just patting it into the skin so it's not disturbing the flakiness. I will say though that I do actually like um, the dense round brush a lot for really textured skin, especially oily skin. If you have a lot of acne scarring or acne in general as well, provided it's not flaky. Um, actually use it a lot for more mature clients to really get in deep into any like fine lines or wrinkles or enlarged pores that they may have as well. Um, it actually does give you a little bit more coverage as well than a sponge does. I would say that a brush like this would give you medium to full coverage application. This one would be full coverage application. Hands would be pretty full coverage, and then a sponge will give you a really nice light blended coverage up to full coverage, depending on the product. Um, I will say that when it comes to using sponges, these are probably going to be my favorite tools for people with dry skin because you're gently pressing all the product into the skin. Um, I would say I would recommend wetting most sponges before using them just because it typically expands depending on what type of foam it is. Expands the sponge, makes it a little bit bigger to use, and the fact that it has a wetness to it. Most foundation or complexion products tend to be hydrophobic, so it's not going to absorb as much product into the sponge and not waste as much product because it's disappearing into the sponge. So by wetting it beforehand, it helps you to get the maximum amount of usage out of your foundation by making sure it sticks to your skin more than it sticks to the sponge. Um, when it comes to cleaning them or out of access to keeping them dirty, like your comment, I would say making sure that you regularly wash your brushes or wash your sponge. I wash this after I use it every time because it makes it easier to keep it clean. Um, when it comes to brushes, I use on a regular basis, like eyeshadow brushes, I have a little, you can see what this is. It's a dry makeup brush cleaner. This doesn't technically hygienically clean your brush, however. It just takes the different colors in between. So if I want to use the same brush to do every different shade of my eyeshadow I did today, I could, because I would just swirl it off and then go to the next color. But when it comes to easily and hygienically cleaning your brushes, um, just using a fragrance-free or antibacterial cleanser, um, even certain like Dawn products are actually surprisingly good at that. You don't have to splurge and get name brand like cosmetics brands that sell brush cleaners. I have a Sephora brand one that works just fine. It's more affordable, and I just spray that on my brushes and I swirl them off. You can also spray alcohol onto your brushes, but that doesn't physically manually clean them. That just temporarily sterilizes some of the product. So I would say getting in there with soap and water. Sometimes brands like Real Techniques will sell cute little like handheld things with little scrubby bits to it to make it a little easier, especially for foundation brushes. Depending on the formulation of the foundation or concealers that you use, though, brushes can get kind of gummed up, and that kind of impedes the natural buffing and blurring effect that a lot of nice brushes like this have. So if you're not cleaning it regularly, it'll get gummed up and not apply as well. So that's another reason, aside from hygiene, that you'd want to make sure that you keep those clean on a regular basis as well. Another brush type that's important is a really big fluffy brush as well, and a smaller fluffy brush. And these are both for setting the face. A lot of people forget to do that, and they'll end up having issues with transferring. You go to hug somebody and your whole face comes off on their jacket. Um, Another reason too you want to set your face is because, especially if you're going to be doing a powder bronzer or a powder blush, and you do that directly onto skin that hasn't been set yet, you're doing a dry onto a liquid, they're gonna stick to one another. You don't wanna dust the wets that way. So I'll get more into that in a minute. Typically though, I'll do cleanser, maybe a toner, definitely a moisturizer and SPF, maybe a primer, depending. Usually I do a primer. Then I'll do color corrector, foundation, and then now I'm going to talk about concealer. So a lot of times people will make the mistake, maybe not a mistake, but there's a common trope that people want to pick a concealer that's like 2 shades lighter than their skin tone. That may have been a trend for a hot minute, but personally, I do not agree with it unless you have two different tones to your complexion. Um, Using a concealer that's too light, especially under the eye area, even though you want to brighten that area, ironically, it can kind of make this area look ashy and kind of prematurely age that area because it actually, the brighter tone of it accentuates any kind of texture, um, especially like the little troughs of the eye area or if you have puffier eyes. Um, so using one that's almost exactly your skin tone is going to make that less noticeable, ironically enough. And it will weirdly enough also help to brighten your under eye area, especially if you've already color corrected. That gets rid of the false darkness that's already there quite easily. Um, I would only really use a concealer that is lighter than your skin tone. Again, specifically to brighten the middle of your face if you have a darker perimeter and you're wanting to embrace both tones of your face to where it doesn't look too flat. Um, Also, another downside to using a concealer that's too light for your complexion is a lot of people will use the same concealer for their under eyes as they do for when they're covering up blemishes. And if the concealer is too bright, remember things that are brighter tend to be perceived as being more forward, where things are darker tend to be perceived as being more receded. So if you put something bright onto a blemish that's already raised, Ironically enough, it's gonna make it seem much bigger and more noticeable, almost literally highlighting it. Whereas if you use exactly your skin tone, it's not gonna draw attention to it, it's gonna match a lot better. So typically, you're gonna wanna use a concealer that's pretty close to your actual skin tone. So when it comes to concealer application, again, I like to do that as the very last step out of applying foundation, um, doing the color corrector first, then foundation, then I'll do concealer. And again, the reason for that is because I would rather use less, less is more. And by already applying a foundation, a lot of times that's already going to have color corrected a lot of what is going on here. So I have to mix my shades because I am in between them right now. My technique typically consists of me pressing things into the skin, especially if I already have a layer underneath it, so I don't disturb it as much and it looks more like skin and less cakey because it's not disturbing everything underneath. I also recommend dragging down the neck a little bit, and this time it's okay to swipe because you're making it sheer. So even by me just applying a little bit of foundation, not even that much. Here we go. Even without concealer, that's already color corrected or even out the complexion and tone of most of my face already. All of that redness just zapped out. All evened out, and it should match the rest. So since I already did such a good job of covering everything, the only area that's really going to need more concealer is maybe my blemish right here, and I can maybe add a tiny bit more to my under eye area. And less is definitely more. Application or location of where you place your concealer, I will say, is important because you don't want to over apply it. So I take a little bit at a time and blend it. And again, just pressing that into the skin. I'm using the pointed end of the sponge to really get into this little narrow area here. And then I might, since I do my eyes first, gently blend things with my finger up into where the bottom of the eyeshadow is on my eye, just to where it's nice and neat. And that way that's all covered. And it looks like skin. There's a little bit of redness slightly peeking out here. You can still see my moles through it. If I wanted to, I could even clean that up even more. Maybe take a little Q-tip, make it to where those are noticeable again. I don't want to cover up every little thing in my skin. I like it to look like skin. So I might take a Q-tip and just make those come back through. All right. So the final step, technically, would be to use a setting powder over the top. However, I do realize that a lot of cream products are very popular. So using like, for example, this one that I used for the Transmask tutorial, it's just a contouring stick. I would apply this here, wherever I need to apply it really, during the wet, quote unquote, wet stage, because I'm putting wet product onto wet product. Same with like a cream or a liquid blush or a highlighter. I want to do cream products at the same time that I'm using my liquid products. Um, Whereas if I'm going to use a powder product, I really want to make sure that I've set my face with powder by pressing powder into the skin, not dragging it, not swirling it, just pressing it into the skin to where whatever powder products you put on top of it will easily blend into it. So there's two different types of translucent setting powder. Well, there's setting powder that isn't translucent as well, but most of them tend to be translucent, or like this one, have a tiny bit of a shade to it. So the benefits of these ones is they're easy to travel with, they're compact, they're less messy than a loose powder. The downside, I would say, is once you hit pan, especially like I have, it becomes a little bit more difficult to actually um, get more of the product on the brush. My favorite personally, though, is loose product. You can see it. And that is because I can very easily, even though it is more messy, I can take a little fluffy brush like this and gently pop it. Again, I'm just stamping the product in this little area, pressing it into the skin. I'm not dragging it because if I swipe it or drag it, powder over liquid can often create texture, and we want the opposite of that. We're actually applying this to smooth things out that much more. So I typically like to take a little bit of the powder, pop it into the lid where I dust off the excess, and then press it into the skin. And then once it's finally already pressed in everywhere, then you can kind of dust off any excess. But I don't want to do the swirling first because I haven't already pressed it into all of the skin yet. Pressing it in first prevents any texture and blurs out the pores. I can even take the smaller, fluffier brush, whether it's a small, fluffy eyeshadow brush or a complexion fluffy brush like this one is, and kind of go around areas that are harder to get in, like right in the nose area and the corner of the mouth. You can even add a little extra translucent powder there too, especially if you know these are areas that are going to move around a lot, like the eye area. You're setting it really nice here. So texture with translucent powder versus regular texture. So blurred out all the pores on my nose, made a lot of things a lot smoother. So the rest of my skin, at least on that side, are a lot more flawless and smooth now. Now, if you had already done the cream products like the cream blush or the cream bronzer or stick contour, etc., you would do the setting powder after you've already done that part. Um, and that will actually help lock in the powder products there as well, especially since it is translucent. It's not going to change the color or intensity of the products underneath it. Now from here, I can finally go and I can add contour and blush and highlighter and my lips and everything else. And then at the very end of that, I can use a setting spray. Cool thing about this is once I actually go and use the setting spray on me, once it finally dries, it'll actually give whatever products I've done on my skin a more skin-like finish, but it will also seal everything, including my eyeshadow, into the base, especially if I have a primer on. So it's kind of like when you're doing your nails, for example, you have a base coat, you do the nail color, and then you have a top coat, kind of like that. So the base coat would be your skincare and your primer. The two layers of nail polish, what you would actually do for the color would be all of your complexion products. And then the final layer would be like your setting powder and setting spray. Now, some people can get away with not using powder, depending on the formulation of the foundation and concealer. But 90% of the time, I want to say I would still use like a setting powder over the top just to prevent it from transferring or coming off throughout most of the day. If you find a couple of issues like your concealer creasing, for example, I would recommend doing your foundation and then doing your concealer last. And almost immediately after you've put your concealer in place and blended it in, going in right away with the translucent powder. And that way it should absorb any extra emulsifiers or liquid kind of products in this area and set it faster to where it doesn't have time to crease. So that's why I don't have any creasing here. If you find that your concealer, especially in your under eye area, is coming across as cakey, the ratio of your moisturizer to concealer might be off. So sometimes, especially when I'm doing complexion, you want to make sure that you have everything moisturized. And then maybe if you have an eye cream for specifically the eye area, um, make sure it's fully absorbed beforehand so that it doesn't separate or get any weird cakey textures. If you find that um, things still look too light, a really easy way to fix that too is to, again, go find your bronzer, a bigger, fluffier brush or a smaller brush, depending, and just going over like if your concealer was too bright still, you can very lightly dust bronzer over that area and blend it into where everything else kind of mixes together. And it should correct it, kind of like a powder color correcting in a way. But in this case, it's more shade correcting to where it's bringing it down a little bit. If it's too dark, a lot of times what you can do is you can add like a fast absorbing eye cream to that area, and then repeat corrector and concealer over that. Again, I tend to do eyes first to where if I come across any issues when it comes to the rest of my complexion too, I can easily just wipe it away and recorrect it. Um, for example, if I were to have done my entire base first and then do my eyeshadow, and I had some fallout fall down onto my cheeks, if I've already set my face with powder, it can be as easy as just flicking it off my cheek while my cheek is still dry from having set it with powder. But sometimes, especially if you still have like black eyeshadow or things like that that kind of get in the way sometimes, that's still going to leave like a shadow on here. In order to fix that, usually you're going to add you don't want to add concealer straight up because it'll mix with the gray and almost just muddy all of it. You can actually kind of take a spoolie, kind of like this, and you can kind of scrape away. It sounds really bizarre, I know, but it works, I swear. Take a spoolie and kind of scrape away any of the dried down foundation and stuff like that. And then gently over the top of it, especially with like your finger, kind of melt in a little bit of whatever color, whether it was your concealer or foundation, on over the top of it to marry it into there, and then kind of gently set it with a little bit of powder again. And then that way, you shouldn't have like a whole cast shadow right there anymore. Oh. Is there any more questions that anyone has? Another friendly reminder, by the way, to everybody who is tuning in that we do have the stream on Twitch as well. And once the stream is over, we should be saving it and eventually post it onto our YouTube page as well. What can I do against folds under my eyes? I get cracks there quickly. So that's actually a pretty common issue is having lines or creasing under the eye. And the reason for that is because your eye moves. You have eyelids that open and close. And when you open them, there tends to be a little bit of a crease right here. You also have your orbital bone right here as well, which is very important for keeping this area safe and protected. Some people have a more prominent dip right here than others, which can be an issue. But if you have very specialized, like tinier brushes like this one, you can easily, like for me, it's right here. You can add maybe just only a slightly brighter color right here, but keep the rest of it the same skin tone. And definitely make sure that you add color corrector to this area. If you have prominent creasing though, like let's say you've applied your concealer and it starts creasing, usually the more you look up and down, the more apparent the creasing is going to become. So if I look like a crazy person, I'm just trying to emphasize the creasing a little bit here. Fortunately, that Tarte concealer is actually really good in that it is a little bit thicker. Same with the IT Cosmetics one. I actually really like that one. Sometimes I don't even set that one. That's how much I like that one, the IT Cosmetics one. It's a little bit thicker, but again, you just apply it into that area with your fingertips or use a sponge to help blend out. But once you start getting more texture here, especially because this is not set and this is, usually you'll see little lines here and there. And those little lines are what will start to carry a lot of the concealer or product in it and almost emphasize it even more in a way that looks, it almost aged my eye even more than on this side. Now, granted, I still have that same line right there, but everything's all evened out, so it's a little hard to tell. Let me see. Another important thing too, if you have creasing, is to make sure that whatever translucent setting powder you use is not going to have like a cornstarch kind of consistency to it. You want it to be even more finely milled. So if I started to notice it creasing, pressing it into the skin again, like I just did it, and then very quickly going in with the setting powder, kind of pressing it in. I'm almost kind of squinting my eyes a little bit too to cause this skin to become more taut. So I can really get in there with the setting powder and make sure that the creasing and the lines, fine lines, are going to be a lot less noticeable, and then you don't have the product clinging to the line as much either. Because a lot of times you'll notice it started creasing because you'll see like almost like a highlight of just product that's coming out of that area that has your skin rubbing against itself. So that's an easy way to kind of help remedy the textural issue right there. Another thing too, by the way, is I do offer one-on-one makeup lessons as well. And that way we can go over your individual skin concerns or issues that you have and ways to fix them, or um, if you wanted to learn a different technique on how to do X, Y, and Z, or you wanted to learn how to do eyeshadow or how to cover up like facial hair, things like that. Um, how to contour, change your face shape for feminizing or masculinizing. We can do completely personalized custom lessons as well if you wanted to do one-on-one makeup lessons with me. Every month I do a free makeup class, but the one-on-one lessons are paid because they are personalized to you. Just FYI. Oh, another thing regarding the setting powder, um, the ingredient I was thinking of was talc. So a lot of setting powders tend to be talc based. Those ones I don't recommend for setting powder if you have texture to your skin, including creases under the eye area. I have a lot of mature clients that I help handle that have literally never even bothered to wear concealer because it always ends up creasing in any fine lines they have. So one of the things that I highly recommend to them is using a setting powder under that area. So the one that I use is the Fenty one, which is really finely milled. It technically has talc in it, but it's so finely milled that you can't even, like, it doesn't even compare to other ones that I've tried that are so much thicker and chalkier. Um, my all-time favorite though is the Too Faced Born This Way setting powder because it actually has hyaluronic acid in it, even though it is a powder. So it actually hydrates and plumps your under eye without having any talc in it as well. And I do like the translucent powder that they have. They also have different tinted ones. The reason you might see tinted setting powders, by the way, is for photography reasons. Some specific, especially ones that are heavier in talc, setting powders, can have like a flashback in photography. So a lot of times, translucent powders might have a hint of pigment milled in with them to where you're still able to take really good flash photos and have it not flash back like Casper. The lesson prices vary. I would just do like a just message me or talk to the team and they'll redirect you to me and we can do a personal consultation. Um, Prices will definitely vary depending on how in depth and depending on what type of things you wanted to learn. Um, Today, I'm not going to be covering any mask or femme contouring techniques. This is just kind of like a gender neutral, like if you want to learn how to color match or use foundation products. Um, I have previous classes where I've done a intro to feminizing makeup and an intro to masculinizing makeup. Those are also going to be on our YouTube page as well. Let me see. I'll try and link that for you. I do have to be wrapping it up here a little bit as I'm a little over the time though. There's also, by the way, if you have any questions, please at me and we can have discussions in the, where is it at? There should be a, under this where you've been attending to the class, there should be a hashtag makeup with Sara class. Well, not class, but like a tab. And if you have any makeup related questions in there, or you want to talk to one another in there, that's perfectly fine. Just, I am busy sometimes and I'm not usually on Discord. So if you want to talk to me personally, just at me on there or direct message me as well. Oh, thank you, Rory. Rory was nice enough to actually copy the link for us. I will post that in here as well. So there should be the link that Rory was nice enough to get us. Should be a playlist of the previous two videos, the masculinizing and the feminizing classes. And eventually this upload will also be going there as well. And that way, if you end up missing something, or if your internet cut out or something, whatever happened, or if you just want to use it as a reference and go along, follow along as well, um, that's an easy way to do it. Usually, when we do these streams as well, we'll be simultaneously casting on Twitch as well. So if you have any issues watching these streams on Discord, the Trans Academy Twitch is also an option as well. But I'm going to be stopping it there, even though I didn't finish. I didn't do bronzer, contour, highlighter. This class was specifically just for teaching more of the nuances and demystifying, finding your shade and foundation, the different formulations and skin types, and ways to make it look like skin as opposed to feeling heavy or cakey, and different issues that you might come across that are very frustrating that you might not be. You'd be like, how do I fix this? So hopefully I addressed most of those in this class. If not, like I said, feel free to reach out to me and we can do a consult for a one-on-one lesson. We can figure out what works best for you, especially if you do have issues with potentially your safety and going to a physical location in order to color match and things like that as well. Thank you so much for everyone who was able to attend and to everyone on Twitch who's also watching. I also apologize to anyone on Twitch who's asking questions. I cannot see that on my end, unfortunately. I can only see the Discord questions. Um, But again, if you are still in our Discord, just feel free to shoot me a private message if you had a question about the class today, or also to do a consult and schedule for a one-on-one class if you're interested. All right, I hope everyone has an amazing day today. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone.